This is the Grow My Clinic podcast by Clinic Mastery, where we help you deliver amazing client experiences to grow your clinic. Well, welcome back to another episode of the Grow Your Clinic podcast. My name is Jack O'Brien. Thank you for joining us for another episode. We have a guest joining us today that you are really going to enjoy. So strap yourself in. Make sure you got the dog on the leash, the treadmill turned up, or the car on cruise control so you can tune in and stay focused. We have Joel Simpson joining us from the Lokko app, Lokko.work. Joel, how you going?
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. This is going to be a whole lot of fun. Now, for context for our listeners, Lokko is an app that helps clinics or hirers, recruiters find locums and or staff for their clinics. But before we get into the specifics of the app and the locum industry in general, who the heck is Joel Simpson? What's your background? Where'd you come from? Are you a health professional? Tell us the story.
Yeah, good question. So I'm from the Gold Coast originally, and I was an exercise physiologist. My undergrad was exercise science, and basically worked in sales role in pharma for a couple of years and ran a group of clinics on the Gold Coast, which was a multidiscipline allied health business. A little bit of software development through that process. The clinic business morphed into doing other things like sleep apnea, diagnosis, treatment. And now I live in Singapore and do more of a consulting role with medical devices and business development pathways for clinic businesses, essentially to sell products and work in software, obviously, with Lokko.
Yeah, right. Unreal. What's the single best thing and worst thing about living in Singapore?
The single best thing is the food, for sure.
Yep.
And I highly recommend everybody coming here to have a little binge. That would be my recommendation. The worst thing, for me, it's the heat. I love, having a beer outside or a barbecue and that sort of thing, and I sweat more than anyone. So it's not not perfect, but yeah, all in all, I think it's pretty good.
I'm actually coming and stopping by Singapore on the way to Japan for the snow in early 2020. So we might even tee up one of those sneaky beers on the way through. That's real. So tell us about some of you mentioned medical devices and pharma. Are we talking about surgical devices or what sort of stuff are we dealing with?
Yeah. So at the moment, because we were doing sleep stuff for a while in the clinics that I used to run, I am doing some work with some oral appliances in sleep apnea and a lot around the diagnosis side as well. So with diagnostic equipment, different types of sleep apnea, or just in general sleep diagnostic devices, and then some sort of, I guess, accompanying products that kind of help people run their practices and that sort of stuff, and then the software that can help manage the patient pathway.
Yeah, right. Tell us about that moment, that catalyst for when you went, all right, I'm done being a full-time clinic owner. It's time to transition to Lokko or different types of work.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I was thinking about this recently, and why we were talking about this earlier. It's clinic businesses are tough. Like they're difficult business to run, and you need to have a lot of passion for your patients, and be that, really, I guess, empathetic, practitioner to have the drive to, keep doing it. And, I had that. I think that there was a point where I thought, okay, well, how do I also have this feeling of, I'm helping people and, doing, great things in healthcare, but also not sacrifice the time with my family. Where our clinic business, I think we had 30 plus practitioners at one point, even more like, support staff, and, we're dealing with multiple relationships. So it was a lot of time. I was working every weekend, big hours, and probably could have used the help of guys like you back when we started. Like I said to you, before we went on air, it was a long time where we didn't know what we were doing. So, you think about the pain that you go through where you're just trying to figure out things on your own and you don't have the support, or you don't have a good mentor, as a clinic owner. there's a lot of pain there. So I think from where we went, and there was lots of other opportunities starting to, kind of appear outside of the clinic business side of things. I think that was the moment where it was kind of like, family life became a little bit more hectic. It sort of all came together, and I was like, all right, well, let's jump into this and see where it goes.
Yeah, right. And so now you own an app.
Yes.
with no software background. How's that working?
Exactly. Yeah, so tricky. There's plenty of lessons that you learn. I think one thing is making assumptions that, because it's healthcare, you're going to know what you're doing.
Right. So your app is like in the healthcare space. So therefore you thought you'd know how it, right? Yeah.
And what we're realizing now is that, it's very much in the recruitment space. It is, it's an app that helps people find staff essentially. So we're becoming more aware of what we need to focus on. We're getting more expertise from people with experience in recruiting, with your patients when you're running a clinic business, getting feedback from customers, getting feedback from practitioners and clinic owners, from hospitals, from all the people using the app. That's what I've been able to focus on because I understand what they need and what they want. And, I've got a pretty good working relationship with the developers, the tech guys that I work with. So we've worked on some other projects before. And I think that is a big part of it, is you have to have a good relationship with, people that do the job that you can't do.
Sure. Yeah.
So that's that. Yeah.
Yeah, really good. And I think, I can vouch for that. Certainly seen you around the place over the last couple of years in especially the physio community and the clinic owner communities that I'm a part of, and seeing you really active listening, providing feedback, which I think is really important. Can we speak to the locum industry or recruitment across healthcare a bit more generally? Can you wrap some numbers or context around what that looks like in health?
Yeah, for sure. So I think the key point that we're starting to realize now with freelance work in healthcare is that it's becoming more and more common. So 10 years ago, there was locum work, but it was pretty, compartmentalized to like hospital, emergency, like things that really, really needed to, that if they weren't available, if those services weren't available, people were going to die.
Sure.
Now we're finding that there's locums by choice. So people want a flexible lifestyle. They want to be able to go, 6 weeks to Tasmania and do, figure out, whether, they like living in a city, or they want to go on a holiday, or they want to, experience a different city culture, that sort of thing. And then there's just the people that don't know if they can work certain days, people returning to work from maternity leave or, paternity leave for stay-at-home dads as well. And, this flexibility that you can have from, doing freelance work is, it's developing and it's growing. And I think overall in the population in Australia, around 32% in 2015 were doing some form of freelance work. So that's 1/3 of the population. In healthcare, it's slightly less. So it's in the 20s. So someone's doing either, which you've got to remember would be like the footy team asked me to do 2 hours on a Saturday, and that might happen once a year. Okay. So it's not like, it's potentially not as regular in healthcare. And I think that healthcare certainly is a lot slower to adopt. And when you think about the relationship with patients and practitioners, there's a reliance in a lot of healthcare fields for continuity of care with the same person. So I don't think we see freelance as much, because it's not like you can just sit in an office and do a project and it's like,
Sure.
this project's finished. But certainly it's becoming more common and more prevalent, and something that we need to prepare for.
What do you define as a locum, Joel? Is it 2 to 6 weeks? Is it anything up to 12 months? What is a locum?
Yeah, so I struggle to get a perfect definition for it, but I think it's non-permanent. So if it's not permanent part-time or permanent full-time, essentially it's a locum. I guess you could argue that if over a certain period, I want a 3-year locum, it's probably not a locum. But yeah, I think loosely defined as a non-permanent position.
And do you find that a lot of locums are doing it because they're traveling or, looking for that transient lifestyle, or is it an in-between thing as they look for more permanent work?
Yeah, great question. I just recently had a conversation with the head of school for Griffith University, funny enough, in Singapore, and we were talking about grads and how locum work is going to become more and more important for graduating health professionals. They have like 2,000 people graduating from nursing across,
Sure.
like they've got people in Singapore and across Australia and remotely and things like that. And so we talked about that becoming more and more important for new grads and for a career development pathway, more so than lifestyle, obviously. But then you have these physios where their thumbs are breaking and they're burnt out, and treating patients every day is tough. And maybe they want to go do something that's a little bit less manual therapy, a little bit less musculoskeletal, and maybe something else. And so this is giving them the opportunity to do that. And that's, we're seeing a mix. And certainly we've even got an article on our website that's like defining different types of locum, and you can kind of figure out which one you are. The traveling physio or the traveling GP or whatever is definitely a type. And we've seen that with people that have taken, users that have taken shifts in certain locations. And there's some really great locations that people can go and work in. I mean, we've had a couple of great ones in Tasmania, rural Queensland, a couple of wine regions. So, obviously those are attractive, but you have to be kind of positioned to take it, right? Like it's hard to go, well, I want 6 weeks annual leave or unpaid leave now because I'm going to go do a locum. It's not necessarily going to, work when they've got a full-time position.
Yeah, right. Interesting. Okay, so talk to me about some of the problems that either clinics and recruiters or hirers face, or the physios, practitioners themselves. Because when I think about it, I go, there's so many graduates coming out of universities across all health professions on one end of the spectrum. And on the other end, there's heaps of clinics that are constantly looking for staff, but yet there seems to be this disconnect. So talk to me about the practitioners or professionals first. What are some of the problems that they face when looking for jobs or locums?
Yeah, I think it's working conditions. So for them, a lot of people want stability, but I think that if we talk about the different groups, so grads, they want exposure. So they want to try different things, right? So health professionals, they want to learn. They want to keep learning. It's, pretty consistent across the board. Doesn't matter what profession you are. So this is what we know from some market research is they spend more on education than a lot of professions, CPD and across a broader field. Having access to, I guess, different things is a great way to attract new grads if that's what you want to do. If we're talking about the older group, it's definitely working conditions and flexibility and things like that, which is very similar to attracting staff in other markets. So, whether it's in law or in, technology or, hospitality, generally speaking, if you can look after your staff and pay them well, it sounds like a no-brainer. But
that's an interesting one you touch on there, because pay, it's a throwaway thing at the end. Where does dollars and cents come into play?
Well, so if you look at the top 100 companies to work for, they're also, like, most of them are in the top 100 in terms of salary. So,
right.
I think it's pretty important to get it right, but then, you also can't cripple your business. And wages in Australia in particular, like you're talking 45, 40%, plus.
Yeah.
In terms of your gross revenue. So as a percentage of gross revenue, wages in Australia, I mean, it makes sense because we have the highest minimum wage, but in terms of where we are proportionally in business, really, really high. So it's difficult because you have to sit down and go, okay, well, how can I pay this person really, really well? And also you're making a bet on whether they're going to be able to perform. And that's where, things like incentivization and all this other stuff and commissions and stuff like that comes into play. Mm-hmm. It's just when we look at shifts being filled in the app and when we look at permanent, because we have permanent positions, you can list a permanent position in the app. The ones that get filled are the higher rates.
Yeah, right.
Always. So I think that's really important to know. There is a threshold. I think below a certain number, depending on the profession, it gets really, really low, the application rate. So we're talking, obviously at some point it's 5% and then 10%, and then you see it spike a lot over a certain threshold. So I think for health professionals, they have a certain number in their head. Yeah. And once they exceed that number. So I think depending on where you are in location, and we don't really have enough data right now to say, per area. We have a general idea per profession, but at some point in the near future, we will be able to sort of tell you as a clinic owner, especially if you're using the app, what levels you kind of need to do and what success rate you're going to get with different salaries and different rates.
Which is a really good point. I think, like you're saying, you've got to pay enough to get over that threshold and make sure that you get enough interest.
Yeah.
But I think given the fact that you mentioned it last, and this sort of resonates with a lot of the clinics that we're working with, is you don't necessarily have to be the highest paying job if you meet the other expectations for a young graduate. It's that exposure, experience, mentoring. For maybe a more experienced therapist, it's around stability and working conditions. So, it's interesting that money is important, but it's not the only factor. As long as you're in the ballpark, by the sounds of it, you're going to do well.
Yeah, I love that. I think that if you have the mentality that you're always communicating with your staff as well, it's really tricky once you get it. I mean, I think the gold standard is 6 per one manager or something like that. Probably let it float up to around 8, but some people manage 20, which is crazy. I mean, it's impossible to give people the attention they need. I think checking in with your staff is really important. If you're not checking in with people, I mean, it's great doing daily huddles and all this sort of stuff where you can all chat and that sort of thing. But I think checking in with people individually is also good because they feel like, okay, well, this person cares about me, and that's a big part of it. If you're training them well and then you give a crap about these people, I think they find it harder to kind of lead from that environment because they feel, when they feel nurtured, they become more loyal, and they'll work harder for you. We've had people that honestly have turned it around. They've gone from, they started out and weren't doing so well, and they this isn't the clinic business, and spent time giving them attention and what training do you need and this sort of stuff. And I think that was one thing we learned from experience was definitely, if you gave them some attention and some time and really focused on them and forgot about everything else, then they do eventually come good and turn it around. It's just, you as a business owner, you need to be providing the patients and things like that as well, which is a whole nother part of it. Yeah,
it is. But you're right. We've got to lead inspired teams. It's not just putting staff in a position and making sure they'll do their job. We're here to lead people and invest in them. You take care of your team, they'll take care of the patients, and the patients will take care of the business in the long run. Okay, that's really helpful. Sorry, continue.
No, sorry, mate. It's perfect. It's a good philosophy. I think that it feels, especially when you're struggling a little bit and, you potentially are breaking even and you're working harder than what you used to, it's common feelings. You got to normalize, okay, well, I kind of feel a bit, crap because I'm working my ass off and I thought I'd be making more money at this point, but it's also well, you've got to realize what phase of business that you're in as well. And it's well, if I'm making a gun team that are going to be loyal, that gun team that's loyal are going to get other people to come and work for you as well. And, it does grow organically in terms of staff and, the patients and everything like that, like you talked about, they do kind of come with that. But you've got to start with that person that's treating the patient. You're a human-facing business. That's how you make your money.
Right. Human-facing business. And our biggest asset are people. Your team, Shane Davis, one of our team, says that as a clinic owner, you've got to be thinking, all right, we're a recruitment, induction and training company before we're a physio clinic or an EP speech clinic. Our job is to recruit, induct and train and nurture the legends that are on our team, 100%. So then if we switch gears over to that practice owner mindset and from a recruiting perspective or attracting locums, what problems do you see them having?
Yeah, I think practice owners in private practice, so let's say the typical physio clinic that's doing musculoskeletal work or something like that, or a podiatry clinic that does toenails and products and that sort of thing. When they are recruiting for locums, I think, it's a knee-jerk reaction because someone's left and they're like, oh no, we've got a 1 week notice period, because typically speaking in employment contracts, what you give your employees is what you get back in return, right? So they've got 1 week to find someone, for the immediate future, which, as we all know, is pretty much impossible. So then you're scrambling to put those patients in with other people, and probably inadvertently half of them go to wherever this person has left to anyway. So I think the struggle is planning and having options. I think that being reactive is not a great place to be
not at all.
Anywhere in business. So I think having a good plan. So how do we deal with somebody leaving? Because you got to also remember, like, as much stress as that gives you, you also need to treat this person well when they leave. And this is a big part of, I guess, HR that you can do really, really well is show your other employees. It's if nothing else, it's an opportunity to show your other employees how well, how much we appreciate your efforts. When you leave, we make a big deal of it. Like, thank you so much for what this person did. You have a going away party, all this sort of stuff. I've been in companies where it's like, shut down their emails straight away, radio silence. No, we want you to pack up your desk. See you later. And there's certainly instances, in terms of intellectual property and stuff like that, but we don't work in those industries where you need to do that.
Sure.
It's like somebody's working on the trading desk and they're managing $500 million transactions. That guy or girl, they might need to leave straight away. Healthcare, not so much. They've got patients, they need to hand over, this sort of thing.
And your team are always watching, yeah? The rest of the team.
Oh yeah, and like everyone that works for you, surely they have at least a few people that they're friends with and they have lunch with and they hang out with, right? Yeah, it's you've got to manage that well. And so that's where I think having good plans will help alleviate some anxiety, and then you'll make less silly decisions.
Makes sense. And so, it's the perfect segue for something like Lokko becomes that, I don't want to call it contingency plan, but it's part of that strategic planning ahead to make sure the team and recruiting is happening healthily, yeah?
Yeah, it should just be a platform that helps you manage it. And that's the thing, is it's not going to solve all your problems for sure. But if you can have, using things like we have an internal pool feature where you can create an internal pool of people that are, love your brand, they love your clinic, and if you've got a day free here, or if you've got a couple of weeks free there, they're happy to come in and do it. That's a really good feature that you can use, and you can actually plan for that. You can, if you're out there in the community building your network, or you've got mates from uni that you love to work with, but they're doing something else. I mean, you've even got a high proportion of allied health professionals that don't even work in their chosen profession. They might be doing something completely different out. They're in the firefighters, or they're working for a medical device company, for example. So I think that's like, those guys are good because, you can have them in your network, and some of them are probably great practitioners because they might have done it for 10, 15 years before, and maybe all they do now is a weekend or, here and there. So I think just thinking about what are my options, and what am I willing to do with my patients? Because obviously if you've got a 20-year experienced podiatrist and they do a fantastic job and they leave, and then you try and backfill that with a new grad, it's probably not going to be the same service.
Yeah.
So I think like having a strategy, what do we do if this happens? It's important, and creating plans for these sorts of situations can really help alleviate a lot of anxiety. Yeah.
I know from experience with clinic owners that when they have someone leave, it is a real pressure cooker that they end up making snap decisions that aren't strategic, and they might have long-term consequences. Even from my own learning, and perhaps those listening can take away that I know that we have employees, team members that used to be with us that now aren't working clinically and that have retired or semi-retired, that would be perfect to be in a pool on Lokko. So I know that's one of my action points off this call will be to set that pool up and make. And I'm sure that there's clinic owners all across Australia, New Zealand, the UK, Canada that are listening in here that go, oh yeah, that's right. Maybe we do need to start thinking about those contingencies, because in my mind, Joel, that's doing the right thing by your patients, is having these plans in place so that management plans for care can continue, right?
Yeah, exactly.
unreal. And so what are some of the cleverer ways that you see clinic owners using Lokko or practitioners for that matter? How are people using Lokko well?
Well, at the moment, I think people are really actually just trying to figure it out. And, the way that you'll be able to use it really well, I think once you have your plans and things is, like I said, that having an internal pool that you can manage and use as a contingency for when people leave. But I also think, just being able to get real-time feedback or data around your area in terms of what pay is going to likely get you, staff, that will be something that we'll be able to provide over time, and I think that that's going to give great feedback from a clinic perspective, but from a practitioner perspective, they can filter. So they can, get rid of all the noise. They can drill down to, I want this specific job. This is the exposure that I want. If it's locum work we're talking about, they can map out certain days. They can put, I'm free to work on a Saturday. I know I'm happy to do any type of work, or I only want to do hospital, or I only want to do sport. So they can filter down, and that's the feedback that we're getting from the practitioners. I can actually design my job, which is perfect. Right. From the clinic owners, just using it, I guess, will give you access to, targeted candidates that you wouldn't otherwise be able to find easily. So I think, it's more around, well, from a business side, you can get more feedback around, better ways to recruit in terms of setting your price and, salaries and stuff like that.
That's awesome. And I know that I get excited about having, if we were to need to advertise, having a great pool of motivated locums candidates potentially. There's obviously innumerable ways to advertise on public job platforms, association platforms. They don't always typically yield the best quality applicants. And so a really centralized place of motivated therapists like Lokko makes a whole lot of sense. You also mentioned earlier, Joel, a resource or two. If people want to get in touch with you or get that, what's the best way to find out more about Lokko, but get in touch with you personally?
Yeah, so people can email. It's joel@lokko.work. So LOKKO.work. And happy to answer any questions. There's some really good articles online around the workforce shift and the gig economy, which is what everyone's kind of calling it. Is, people are, especially with the new generation of practitioners coming through, I think they're very similar in terms of, other industries for that generation. Is the 20-year-olds that are kind of getting through uni at the moment. They want to experience more. They've got less patience, the perception of less time, and they want to, get out there and jump. And that's the other thing for them, is that for a new grad, there's less, I guess, if you're doing freelance work or gig work, locum work, which is what it's called in our industry, where they're less likely to have, a cross against their name if they're not in a job for long. So it gives them the opportunity to, trial a few things without, us looking at their resume and it's saying 6 months here, 6 months here, 6 months here, which obviously doesn't look great in terms of loyalty. But, Lokko is going to give them the opportunity to kind of do that under the radar and really figure out what they want. Because, I don't know about you or all your listeners, but even now I still haven't figured out what I want to do with my life, Like, I think it's, we all kind of have like this evolving change in desire for what we want to achieve. And, I think that's a big thing for this new generation, is they're just more aware of it. They have more access to technology and information, than maybe what we did when we were younger.
That's awesome, mate. Well, thank you for providing your details for people to get in touch with you personally and to check out more around Lokko. Have you got any parting words of wisdom, clinic owners, practitioners? What do you think?
I'd love to say something truly philosophical, but I think the key is focus on what you're doing, do it well, get it right before you move on to any sort of side projects or anything else.
Don't chase the shiny objects.
Yeah, don't chase the shiny objects. And I think having a really good plan, like from the locum side and from the recruitment side, having a good plan is really important, and it will help you focus on, having the breathing space. If you can come up with an interim locum plan, it'll give you the breathing space to recruit well. And I'm sure that you guys have plenty of advice for your listeners on how they can do that. So yeah, it's a good thing to have in place, for those moments.
Unreal. Joel, thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. Listeners, make sure you check out lokko.work. That's LOKKO.work. And we look forward to bringing you another episode of the Grow Your Clinic podcast again really soon. Bye for now.
This is the Grow My Clinic podcast by Clinic Mastery, where we help you deliver amazing client experiences to grow your clinic.